I made this in just 7 days, and I wanted to share 10 tips for those of you who are just starting to learn HTML and CSS, as well as for those who haven't coded in a while, like me. By the end of this video, you should have a good starting point for general tips on brainstorming your own project, and what to look out for in terms of resources and other things you should know about. If you found any of these tips useful or you have advice of your own, please drop a comment. Look forward to reading. So my first tip for any beginner or a person like me who's just refreshing their knowledge again, it's all about determining your project duration, which is basically how much time do you plan on investing into working on this project, both for like each individual session in general perhaps, as well as the entire scope of it as well. This basically sets expectations with yourself for like what you're looking to get out of the project, both as a final result and also just as a personal challenge for what you're going to be doing each day. In my case, I gave myself 7 days to work on this project, though I narrowed it down and said, well, so long as I work on it for 7 days, I'm not going to care as much about the hour quantity. So that's an example of what you call a flexible goal, though you can definitely nail it in further if that's something you want to do. It's something that'll be productive for you. Tip number 2 is thinking ahead. And what this means is preparing everything you need so you can really make the most of your time. Thinking ahead actually includes a few things, so we're going to go over that now. The first and most prevalent one in my mind is just right from the very beginning, are you doing responsive design? Which, you know, ideally, yes, but I just say this because it's going to really impact how you approach designing your project later on and what kind of compromises you're looking to make, right? Also, just to clarify, responsive design is basically when you, well, consider the different devices that people are going to be using, which can range from, you know, your typical desktop to also mobile devices, iPad devices, different sizes of screens, big monitor, small monitor. So the next thing after considering responsive design and whatnot, it's what tools are you going to be using? So this can include things where, are you making your own images, for example? And if you're making your own images, how are you going to manage like the file size, right? There's ways to like shrink it down and make it take up less space. There can be things like Figma, which is like perfect for web design. And also, of course, and most importantly, where are you coding? What application are you using for that? Are you just using a basic notepad or something? For me, it was Visual Studio Code, but it's kind of up to you for what you're looking for. The final thing when jumpstarting any project, especially as a beginner, is what resources are you going to need? And resources in this case includes what knowledge do you need to have? Are you confused about things, which I'm sure you are, and if that's the case, that's where you do your little internet deep dive search about like, what the heck is that? What the heck is an HTML? What does that mean? I don't know. Tip 3 is to brainstorm and sketch your design. This can save a lot of time because I feel like, sure, you can learn HTML and CSS and try out all these different things, right? Which, that's cool, especially if you're just, I don't know, messing around. But if you want to have an actual cohesive sort of project with clear inspiration and whatnot, something you're like, yeah, I want to do that. That's what I want to make. That's what you call a project. You're going to want to invest all your brainstorming time somewhere that's very easily changeable. So that could be paper, that could be on an iPad, on a program like Procreate, for example. Could be anywhere. It's just, again, sketching out what it might look like, and it can be very rough or it could be as polished as you would like it to be. Tip number 4 is to stay organized. This tip also has multiple parts. Gasp! I feel like the main thing is just general best practices, at least anything you can kind of fit in your brain so early on, right? Because I know Improvements will be made along the way, but it's nice to start off on the right foot, I guess. Some things when it comes to being organized are essential, like file organization and structure and whatnot. How you could have an image, right? How you can find that image within your coding application. All that kind of depends on your folder structure. So I'm like, that's kind of important. You kind of need to do that if you want to actually be able to use the things you're putting into it, right? And in addition to that, it's also figuring out best practices for yourself for keeping your code readable and nice to look at. And especially if you consider the idea that you're going to be coming back to this project for, well, however long you determine. In our case, or my case, it's 7 days. When I open up the file, I'm like, where's the stuff? What am I looking at? What am I looking at? And I know there's a plugin. It's called Beauty on Visual Studio Code. It helps you format your code very quickly. And in addition to that, there's things like word wrap if you don't want stuff running off the screen. And then there's, well, ways to make notes within your own document, which I'll show you here. That's very helpful, especially if you want to give a little note to self for what the heck are you doing? What's happening here, right? Or just another way to segment things off potentially. You should look into these things, find some other tutorials that get in depth about that because it's important. And you want to build some pretty strong, good habits, or at least the best you can do as a beginner, as someone just hopping back into this world if you're revisiting it. Just take it easy, but, do your best, do your best. Tip number 5 is learn the basics, but not too much. What do I mean? Don't get caught up in learning every little technical detail because I feel like the joy when it comes to a project-based learning or whatnot, is the actual doing and then searching for answers as problems arise. Of course, when you're just starting out or you're just getting back into it, it is helpful to know what words to use, especially as you type them into that search bar. You're like, what's that, right? What even is this? I don't know what that is. It's pretty important to know how to identify what the heck is going on, at least the most basic of terms, the most basic of concepts that go into coding, especially for HTML, CSS. Having a cheat sheet can actually be a good workaround with this, on top of it, the very least skimming some of the most basic terms at the start of somewhere like We3 Schools or Code Academy or whatever, right? Just a little bit, just enough. I say this mostly because coding and design and all the terms you need to know, you'll learn it along the way. It's just, in my opinion, better to retain that through experience in projects and yeah. Tip number 6 is to use live previews, and this is basically to save time with refreshing your browser when you have this page opened up. Rather than doing all of that, you could just see the changes live as you're making them, which is pretty useful. There's not a lot else I have to say about it. Typography, cool. And where can you get typefaces? Well, there's 3 primary ones that I know about. I know there's more. There's even ways to make your own custom one. Well, I don't know about that. What I know about is Google Fonts, Adobe Fonts, and DaFont. Pretty useful. Why typography? What's the deal with that? I mean, well, obviously it starts off with the basic New Times Roman, and we don't want that everywhere. I mostly want to bring emphasis to it because it can do a lot to change the feel of a design. And again, that's just through a typeface. I personally used DaFont a lot. It is more specific about the permissions, if you can use it for profit or personal use. And well, in my case, I'm just making a personal website, so it's whatever, right? Once you get into that habit of looking at typefaces, you'll be able to just, download a bunch, play with it, see how it looks on your site, and you can see yourself just how cool it is. Tip number 8 is to study other websites. And this can honestly go pretty early on too, as you are generating ideas for how you want your site to look. Sometimes it helps to have some inspiration rather than approaching something completely from scratch. Though beyond just like the ideation phase, this is more about using that little inspect tool and seeing the code that makes the site work. You're seeing a final product, a final project here, or at least a mostly done and usable one, and you just see everything that's going into it to make it what it is. And at first, I will say too that this can be kind of overwhelming. You're looking at a bunch of gibberish. It gets even worse for other coding languages. This is the more readable stuff, and you're like, whoa. At least that's how I felt. But how I work around this is to basically look a little bit closer. Pinpoint exactly what you're taking inspiration from, exactly what you're curious about. You're like, what's that? What's this little cursor thing here? What, this cat follows the mouse? What's happening? That's actually what happened for me when I was working on my project. I wanted to have some kind of cool cursor now because I got inspired from this other website. I went on my own little investigation for how to do that. Oh, apparently I'm trying out JavaScript too. Whoopsies, whoopsies, whoopsies. Don't worry, I don't know anything about JavaScript. I know some things, that it's cool, and I like it. I like seeing it, but I'm not going to know the ins and outs about it. So anyway, I made a little fire cursor or whatnot. I was like, wow, look at that. And it just led me to some new areas. And this whole story is just about you can find something that's possible and you're going to be like, what? That's possible. I want to do something like that. And yes, that's how inspiration works, but it's just the fact that it's like an actual example you can look at, actual code. You can see how the files intermingle, interact, the HTML, the CSS, and how it looks. That's it. That's all I have to say. Tip number 9 is to follow your interest, but to also still accommodate and work with your time frame, your goals, all that, because it's kind of like that whole thing where any kind of project you can imagine, it can immediately become something really ambitious, or maybe it's something a little too easy. You kind of have to just see where you're at with that. How much time do you have, basically? How much time are you willing to learn all the things you need to know? And how can you break that up? Websites can be like never-ending projects, honestly, especially as you continue to learn new things. So it's important to know what's done for you, even if the project itself isn't complete. So it's about recognizing your achievements and to feel that sense of satisfaction that comes with, doing something the hard way. Like, wow, that's really cool. For me, it was just around the number of days I'd work on it. And even if there were things I would probably have liked to fix or add on or include, I just cut it there, and I feel pretty satisfied with how far I got given the little scope of my challenge. Just to summarize that again real quick, because I know it's a lot. Don't be afraid to do cool things, learn about new things, right? But just work with yourself with when you want to actually get it done and what you call done in your mind. The final tip I have, this time around, because I'm sure there's an infinite amount of things we could explore. Do you know how many resources there are just on the internet for all things coding? It's insane, but my final one for you today is to test on different browsers and devices. If you plan on having your webpage be publicly accessible, then you're going to have to work on accommodating for the different types of browsers people use, the different types of devices they might be on. Web design to me is basically being kind of flexible and being willing to compromise with your design because it will display differently. So whatever you're looking at, even say with that live preview thing I told you about earlier, sure, that's your experience. That's what you're seeing on your device, on your favorite browser maybe, but that could just be completely different elsewhere. I have an example too. I had this font, right, that I had a little outline around, and for some reason it displayed on every single browser except Firefox. And Firefox is literally my favorite browser. And I was like, what the heck? Because that was the one I don't know, that was my preferred one, and everything else, it worked fine elsewhere. And I just kind of like, well, I guess that's how it is. It looks good most places, but you can't win them all, right? You can't even win your favorite browsers. There's not a perfect solution sometimes. That's okay, but you can make the most of it. There's one thing I know about. It's called media queries. I didn't try it this time around, but it's a way to be more specific in applying CSS styles depending on like the device a person's using, for example. But it gets deeper than that, of course. So if there's really just not a good responsive design like solution, you could use that and just accommodate for as much as you're able to. So those are all my tips, speaking as someone who's getting back into coding. I had experience in the past, it's since withered away, but after doing this, I definitely felt a renewed passion, just a renewed excitement for just taking it on. I want to give a big thank you to my supporters on my website, and if you happen to enjoy what I do as well, you could join too. I share behind the scenes updates on my art and projects there, as well as other things like a sticker club and bonus live streams. Thanks for watching.